Before I begin today's video, I would like to encourage anybody experiencing sexual, domestic, or other types of abuse to seek the resources that they need in order to heal. And if you are in need of said resources, please contact me and I would be happy to direct you to the resources available online. And this video is not meant to dissuade anybody from coming forward with their own trauma. It is, however, my opinion on the matter in question. So with that, we will start today's video. Thank you for watching. He was crippled, but only his body was cracked. It's not simple, nor is it an easy matter to explain. Let's just leave it at that, she says, and she closes the holy book of lies. She covers her eyes, denying to herself what she thought happened. A poem by the character Tracy Freeland, played by Evan Rachel Wood in the 2003 drama film 13. The film depicts the coming of age of a 13-year-old girl, Tracy Freeland, who becomes enmeshed in a toxic friendship with her co-partner Evie and quickly turns into a rebellious teenager who gets a tongue piercing and tattoos and hangs out with boys and does drugs, much to the chagrin of her mother, of course. Hi, and welcome back to Don't Drink the Flavor Aid. In homage to the latest content theme I've been covering, including female killers, lady cult leaders, and the female psychopath phenotype, today I'm going to be covering the Marilyn Manson defamation lawsuit against Evan Rachel Wood and Illma Gore. Most content viewers that are now invested in this case probably have chosen sides by now. Overall, I would say that I support the plaintiff in the case, Marilyn Manson. And we'll get into the reasons why I stand behind Manson as the plaintiff in the case, and I definitely think that Illma Gore in particular needs to go to prison. If you'd like to hear more about what I have to say about the female psychopath phenotype, including examples of our famous lady psychopaths, please tune in to Don't Drink the Flavor Aid on Spotify, or go ahead and watch my video on Eileen Wuornos and what happened to this damsel of death. So getting into today's topic, I will not be looking at any of the other allegations against Manson aside from Evan Rachel Wood and Illma Gore and the relevancy to this case. Today I will be giving a mental health and personality perspective on the three people in question to kind of analyze what I kind of believe is going on in regards to these allegations and the people in question and their motives, etc. I will not be bringing up any particular mental health diagnosis or psychiatric condition, but I will be bringing up personality features and traits to kind of analyze the people in question here. And just a heavy disclaimer, this video is for education and entertainment purposes only. I'm not diagnosing anybody. I haven't talked to any of these people. It would just be unethical and unhelpful to try and cram in an armchair diagnosis here versus looking at features that we can observe, at least in the media and the coverage, and make assumptions on their personality features based off of that. So all of this is speculative, but it is based off of my informed, educated opinion as a mental health professional and a self-proclaimed personality psychology nerd. Also, I will be providing links. I am not affiliated with any of these content creators. I have not contacted them. They don't know of me. I simply watched a lot of their content for research for this video, so I could really give an informed perspective on the case and the people in question. So thank you for those content creators. I will link those videos below and mention them throughout the video as well. And listeners, be advised that I will briefly be mentioning topics of domestic and sexual violence and briefly mentioning suicidal ideation. I'm going to be jumping around a bit on this timeline, but I'm just going to be giving a brief overview of the relationship between Evan Rachel Wood and Marilyn Manson. as well as leading up to today's topic. So according to this 28-page court document that we will be getting to, Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood were in a relationship from 2006 to 2010. And according to what I could find on the interwebs, the status of their contact post-breakup is unknown, but it seems that they had pretty much no contact after they broke up. And as far as I can tell, the breakup at the time was amicable for both parties. However, we don't know. With celebrity breakups, there's so much that happens behind closed doors, and a lot of us armchair people make speculations of what we think happened. But keep in mind, a lot of them would prefer to keep their romantic life private, just like the rest of us would. So it's really unknown of what their contact would have been like post-breakup. However, what we do know is that in 2019, prior to any of the sexual assault allegations against Manson, Evan Rachel Wood was allegedly hospitalized for post-traumatic stress disorder and publicly reported that an unknown perpetrator had sexually assaulted her in the past, resulting in this latent trauma that was, I believe, uncovered maybe potentially by a sexual assault scene maybe she was filming or something. I'm just vaguely recalling, but either way, the allegation is that she was hospitalized for suicidal ideation. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in 2019 by media reports, and then she said that there was an unnamed man that did sexually assault her, supposedly in a prior romantic relationship, but she did not name any perpetrator at the time. So flash forward 2 years, Evan Rachel Wood officially names Marilyn Manson, aka Brian Werner, as her perpetrator. And this is a claim that Marilyn Manson and several of his associates have ardently denied. And to this date, there's really no evidence in terms of physical evidence, recordings or photographs or statements or anything like that during the time of their relationship from 2006 to 2010. It's just very vague and fuzzy, and unless there's somebody that can come forward with specific evidence that the relationship at the time was coercive, domestically violent, above and beyond just emotional distress that is typically acquired when one is in a relationship with a quote-unquote like-minded partner and living a quote-unquote spirited lifestyle, and we will leave it at that for now. So getting back to Evan Rachel Wood, since she has officially named Brian Werner, also known as Marilyn Manson, as her perpetrator, she has given multiple media interviews. And the most recent interview she did with Dr. Ramani Durvasala, who is a psychologist and expert on narcissism. And I haven't scoured the internet watching all of the media interviews that she provided because it just seems redundant. But I did watch the interview she did with Dr. Durvasala. So we will be coming back to that in a little bit. So between the time that Evan Rachel Wood was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and then publicly reported that Marilyn Manson was her perpetrator, she began working on a documentary called Phoenix Rising, which did air in a 2-part episode on HBO at some point this year. She also co-sponsored a bill, California bill called the Phoenix Act, which I believe became a bill in 2019, if I'm incorrect, but has since apparently gained more political traction in these last coming months with this media coverage of the trials. But again, that's a strong allegation. I don't remember who said that or stated that, if that was a content creator or if that's some specific legal analysis, I don't know, but it certainly is an interesting perspective. The documentary called Phoenix Rising was produced by Amy Berg. It stars Evan Rachel Wood, where she also talks and meets with other alleged survivors of Marilyn Manson's abuse. And I did go ahead and just watch the trailer, and it looks like there are photos from some of the victims, but it appears as though these were probably taking place after shows or shoots for Marilyn Manson's music videos, which are notorious for being quite involved with, different themes of sadism, masochism, the kind of, what was that? They were going for the kind of fake snuff film kind of vibe, right? At least that was the vibe I got when I was doing a little bit of research on that kind of glam rock, shock rock era, especially combined with that more dark, grungy element that we saw with the 90s and early 2000s. So glam rock really got its start in, the 50s into the 60s. Of course, everybody kind of looks at Elvis as that quintessential starting point for rock and roll moving into having that theatrical element. And of course, there are other artists that can also be credited with really bringing more of the theatrical element to, and a visual element to the music. But when you look at the 60s and the counterculture revolution and movement, and especially in the UK and San Francisco and all of that, you're seeing artists like David Bowie represent himself with Ziggy Stardust, right? Space Oddity. Remember that music video? That was quintessential glam rock, right? That's a man in very androgynous, over-the-top makeup and hair and costumery, and we love it. We eat it up, and we did at the time. David Bowie was an inspiration for decades musically, and I mean, look at Elton John and all of the performers that took it over the top, right? That's really the quintessential element of rock and roll, is sometimes pushing the boundary, right? And again, music wasn't always somewhat of kind of this industry where it has become now, where artists have the funds and the means and the connections to create these visual masterpieces of really bringing it to the next level of the visual representation of the song, the art form, right? And so again, when we think about the glam rock and the shock rock of the 60s, 70s, 80s, you're seeing more of kind of that stage presence, theatrics, pyrotechnics, and visual storytelling that way, really engaging with the audience, very high energy, right? Really what we live for and thrive for when we're attending a performance, and that's what makes these people rock stars, right? Really like demigods in the eyes of the mere mortals, so to speak, right? So I'm thinking about all the music videos I've seen from shock rockers, glam rockers, and if you look at the history, the themes do tend to get a little bit darker. So you've got Motley Crue, they have Looks to Kill. We have a whole group of these feral, scared-looking women with like this kind of like Xena warrior woman that they're kind of interacting with in this music video. And it kind of makes me think of like, Barbarella from the 60s, 70s, and then kind of like the glam Hollywood movie posters from the 30s, 40s of these beautiful women in gossamer gowns and their hair done, but they're shrieking back in fright and terror from these terrible monsters like the creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein's monster, Boris Karloff's mummy, you name it. So that's really kind of what the glam rock into the shock rock was going for, was this grotesque horror, classic horror element that then kind of morphed into more of this grotesque, really kind of like shock value that we see with like Slipknot and their kind of masks that they wear. And we also see horror in terms of the movie genre change too, with more of the grotesque kind of gore elements like that, and the transition from more of the classic Hollywood, very minimal influence in terms of blood and body parts flying everywhere, and more on just the overall suspense of the monster and his interaction with possibly, this beautiful damsel or mysterious woman, etc., right? So again, I think when we're looking at just the general area, the different influences on musicians and artists and different creators like that, I think that the influences that cinema has on music and likewise, and all of those different art forms, the influence they have on one another can't be understated, just in terms of where we've seen music go, especially with like grunge and hard metal and all of the shock rock kind of stuff. So I would just like to keep all of that in mind as we're discussing these themes that come up from the allegations against Marilyn Manson, is where music was at the time. Music videos were really experimenting with harder themes. And so individuals that were participating in some of these more shock rock type videos were probably asked and invited to participate in various types of activities that would seem abnormal to the outside viewer, right? So again, we're talking these themes of BDSM and light torture and what have you. And again, I haven't watched these music videos. I haven't talked to these women. Maybe it really was completely out of bounds, non-consensual. However, I also keep in mind that there was probably a lot of drugs happening too. And I don't know which of these people were participating in heavy drug use at the time that these alleged violent situations were taking place. So again, I think maybe that might be something to draw attention to, is just where music videos and performances like this where what was normal at the time, right? What was normal for a female or any performer being invited to be a part of a music video in, California, LA at the time. Clearly, I am not victim blaming anybody, because again, if you're invited to do something and you're signing a contract or there's some sort of verbal agreement, I don't know what takes place. I'm not in that industry. But if, you're asked to do something that could cause you bodily harm or a bruise or a mark, again, that's something very well you need to be, made aware of like, okay, this could get really unhinged in this aspect, and you can't come back and sue me, right? I mean, the whole disclaimer clause, I'm sure that must have been, part of the case, but again, I'm assuming that this takes place. And this is true, I'm thinking if an actor or were to say, okay, we can hire a stunt double or you can do your own stunts. However, these are all the injuries that could happen to you. And they can consent, yes, or, consent or say, no, I'm not doing that, right? So again, there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I'm not assuming I know all the factors, because again, I have not talked to these women. I do not know what their experience is. And I would love to understand what really did happen at the time when these music videos were being filmed and they were being invited to participate in these types of themes. Because again, like, think about 9 Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson were kind of going for this pseudo snuff film kind of vibe. And again, like, they weren't aiming to make snuff films. Obviously, they were just hoping to give you that kind of vibe, because that's what we were seeing at the time in horror, right? We're seeing more shock, more gore, more people getting their limbs cut off. Like, I mean, remember the whole Saw franchise? I mean, we live and breathe for that shit. We eat it up. That's the kind of horror we wanted in the late 90s into the early 2000s and even into now, right? We just want to be completely horrified. And apparently there is just something very appealing about a beautiful woman who is shrieking in terror and this villainous over-sexualized monster, right? I don't mean to make light of this really dark theme, but again, this is what horror really draws attention to, is these dark themes that have existed in humanity forever, right? There's always these dark, looming, ominous, monsters in society, and there's always victims and damsels in distress at times, right? But then again, we also see women are not purely just these beautiful objects. They really can become these empowered Xena, Princess Warrior, Barbarella types as well. And again, we see so many different themes play out, but one of them is this kind of sadism, masochism, darker sexual kind of culture that plays out in music as well. So we could really delve into the whole BDSM element, and absolutely we will in future content, because it is an important aspect of not only this case, but I think a lot of individuals out there that are trying to make sense of, again, all of these themes that we don't openly talk about in society, but we really need to at least talk about it behind closed doors with trusted people, because so many people are just really lost and confused and feeling like what happened to them, it wasn't right. And that, I think, draws attention to a lot of the misunderstanding about the BDSM culture and all of that. But again, I'm not going to purport to be an expert or even an armchair expert on any of that. But I will certainly talk about my opinions and educated ideas on the matter in future content. But let's kind of move on then into this current lawsuit. So Manson filed the lawsuit, the defamation lawsuit, which we'll get into the details as we go on, in March of 2022. And then in 2023, a judge struck down the defamation accusation in part of Manson's lawsuit because of something called SLAPP legislation, which I am not going to get into because there are lawyers that can explain that very well, and I won't do it justice. But I will sum it up as it rests the burden of proof on defamation on the plaintiff rather than the defendant. So therefore, it makes it more difficult for Marilyn Manson to claim defamation and a little bit easier for Illma Gore and Evan Rachel Wood to say, well, this is just freedom of speech. I'm just exercising my right to free speech here by saying these things about Manson. So ironically, even though we still refer to this as the defamation lawsuit, the defamation claim has been struck down, but there are 3 other claims that we will go through. One of which is intentional infliction of emotional distress. And again, I'm not going to go into the details of this. I will link the document and other content down below from other creators. However, I will just surmise it to say there was a quote-unquote swatting, which means calling a welfare check, having law enforcement go to somebody's home because you believe that they might be at risk of harming themselves or another person. And that is said to inflict emotional distress on somebody, especially when they're not expecting that and they are not in crisis. So, the next claim is violation of the Computer Fraud Act, hacking into Marilyn Manson's social media. And this is a claim specifically towards Illma Gore, who allegedly hacked into Brian Warner, Marilyn Manson's social media. Again, I'm not totally clear on that. It is in the document. And then the final claim, impersonation over the internet, and that's Illma Gore allegedly created a fake email account impersonating Marilyn Manson and or Brian Warner. And I don't know why she did this, but it maybe in the document as well. Again, it's a 28-page legal document. Scour it if you like, but there are many content creators that have summarized it up for you quite well. So go ahead, check out their content. So go ahead and pause here and check out that content if you really want to understand the ins and outs of the case, the SLAPP legislation, the Phoenix Act, all of that, and then come back to this part in the video. Is evil something you are, or is evil something you do? So first I would like to look at Illma Gore because I feel that she's the main culprit in terms of the dark, sinister element of everything that's going on in this case. Illma Gore has really become a shock artist. So one of her projects is a 3D rendering of Donald Trump, which is quite unflattering. Again, not super shocking. She also requested blood from donors, and when she received blood from 80 different people, she created a giant mural painted from the blood of her donors. Again, well, quite kind of gross, not illegal. However, Illma Gore has also been accused of fraudulent activity, including stealing the identity of her family members and committing credit card fraud. So that right there is a huge red flag. And the more I learned about Illma Gore, the more I really wondered if she was a female psychopath. So let's take a look at the traits of really what is a psychopath. And again, if you've seen my other content, you understand how murky this question is. But for simplicity's sake, we will look at the quintessential dark triad, which has recently been updated to a dark tetrad to involve sadism. But for simplicity's sake, we will stick with the dark triad, lest we then advance to, I don't know, the dark pentagon and the dark hexagon, so forth. So, the dark triad is broken down into three main features. We have narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. So let's go through each one of these and how they might apply to Miss Illma Gore. So in terms of traits of psychopathy, again, I don't know Illma Gore, never talked to her, but from what seems readily available on the interwebs, it appears as though she does meet traits of psychopathy, or what we think of psychopathy as being related to traits of antisocial personality disorder clinically, right? So coldness, callousness, lack of empathy, no remorse, no guilt. It doesn't seem like she's a woman that would contain a lot of these qualities, seeing as though she stole money from her family members and doesn't seem to really express much remorse for that. In addition, impersonating any individual, it makes you really question where somebody's mindset is at and if they have comprehension of other people's needs and feelings. So if she were trying to gain information on Marilyn Manson and she chose not to go with the legal avenue of doing so, what does that really say about her judge of character and her mental state and her ability to perceive how her actions impact other people if she's creating a fake email address and pretending to be Marilyn Manson? So that could lead to evidence that perhaps she is psychopathic, perhaps she is cold, callous, and completely disregards the feelings of others. Of course, we don't know what her interactions are like with Evan Rachel Wood. Are they still in this enmeshed codependent relationship? Are they mutually benefiting from the Phoenix Act and all of this publicity? That I don't know. These are all speculations. I don't have enough information to really glean a real clear opinion on the matter. However, I am biased to believe that Illma Gore is quite psychopathic, just based off of the evidence I have. In terms of her narcissism, is she self-entitled? Is she arrogant? Does she really, truly believe that the world must revolve around her? Why else would she steal credit card information from her sister and steal money from her family members. Again, this is all alleged. I don't know, but this is alleged out there on the interwebs. So if she was not self-entitled in believing that, well, I'm entitled this money in some way, what was her motive for stealing other than just, again, complete disregard for the feelings of others? That's where it's difficult sometimes to pinpoint what's psychopathy and what's narcissism is, again, unless I really were to examine the contents of kind of her inner monologue, such as we can with certain cult leaders out there that post, lengthy blog posts about how they want to get rich quick, how they want to exploit people, all of that. We don't have that with Illma Gore, so it's a little more difficult to really determine where her mindset is at. But I guess the expression of her art form does call into question a little bit of this kind of exhibitionism, disregard for social norms and rules that we might see with antisocial personality disorder, although that is pushing it. Like, again, the blood thing is gross, but it's not illegal. It's, people were willingly giving her their blood. It's just, again, shock value. And again, her other stunts, I don't know how far she's gone in terms of her little computer hacking side hustle, but I would love to know more to really determine what kind of narco psychopath this person really is. But again, I'm sure that if we really were to sit down and talk to her, she would be very self-entitled under the guise of being a feminist or whatever. In terms of Machiavellianism, if we're to assume all of the other claims in terms of her possible narcissism and psychopathic traits, the same could be said of how exploitive she is towards other people and using them to leverage her own gains and advance herself versus having genuine relationships, which I am heavily biased to assume that's probably the case with Illma Gore, possibly with Evan Rachel Wood, although I'm less clear on that. Moving on from Illma Gore to Evan Rachel Wood, we'll first look at what it works in her favor for this case, and then we'll look at some of the red flags. Evan Rachel Wood has done quite a bit of media coverage and interviews regarding the alleged abuse that she sustained from Marilyn Manson. And I only watched one of the interviews, and this was with Dr. Ramani Durvasala, who is a clinical psychologist and expert of narcissism who produces a lot of content on YouTube specifically. And in the past 2 months or so, Evan Rachel Wood was interviewed by Dr. Ramani on YouTube, and this was posted on YouTube. And this was the only interview that I watched of Evan Rachel Wood talking about the abuse that she alleged she sustained. And it's very clear that she, seemed to believe that what she was talking about, just based off of some of her body language, and again, I'm not a body language expert, it's just, she very well just could be a very excellent actress. However, it seemed like she was genuine when she was describing what she perceived as psychological manipulation. So in specific, she was describing very mundane type situations like getting in an argument over a bottle of water versus a glass of water, staying up all night arguing about that. Now, while this could very well be a very intricate, fabricated story, I think it also might be a little bit of quintessential, I hate to say it, but he said, she said kind of stuff where, again, when you're a teenager and maybe you're imbibing the nose candy because, I don't know, your boyfriend is a rock star who is not quiet about enjoying cocaine and drugs, like, par for the course, sweetheart. Like, I'm not trying to victim blame. Again, we're all young and dumb. I've been young and dumb. I've been 17, 18, 19 years old, and even as an intelligent person, you're still under the guise, under the rule of social and hormonal factors and brain development and social development. So when you add nose candy and the glitz and glamour of that Hollywood lifestyle and the fact that you've been groomed to be an actress since you were 5 by, your family or whoever, I don't know. All of those factors just alone will absolutely psychologically mess you up. And I think they can also really warp your perception of what really occurred in a relationship. Especially if maybe both of you are hungover and coked up or coming down, and this is when you're having the argument. I mean, all of us can relate to both you and your spouse having the flu, recovering from, the vid, and you're high off cough syrup or whatever, and you're just at each other's throats, right? You're just like, not physically, but you're more naggy, you're whiny, and maybe because both of you are underslept and woozy and have brain fog and have been, pooping your guts out or whatnot, like, yeah, maybe you're going to look back on that moment months later and say, oh my gosh, like, we were really so nasty to one another and it didn't make any sense why we were that way. But hindsight's 2020. And again, I'm not trying to be funny. You can take a normal domestic little squabble like that, but hyperbolize it when you're talking about, an 18-year-old woman, 37-year-old man, add the rock star, Hollywood actress element, and the drugs and the glitz and the music videos and the BDSM element to the music videos and beautiful women everywhere that she's competing with constantly. Again, all of this stuff really, when you're talking about being psychologically manipulated, even if Marilyn Manson was this master manipulator that carefully, groomed her over the years, starting when she was a younger teenager, even if all of that is absolutely true, he is certainly not the only person that has groomed her, right? And I'm not even talking about grooming for, like, in the human trafficking sense. I'm saying in the sense of, like, grooming somebody to then be in some sort of relationship or connection with them for some sort of gain. That's Hollywood. Again, that's why, like, I'm not trying to victim blame, because if Manson did what she's proclaiming, like, yeah, I would like to know more. I'd like to understand his side of the story and really make clear how everybody is perceiving this, because that's really the only fair way to do it. And that's possibly what might happen as a result of this trial, but maybe not, because we're not really entitled to that information. That's between, Evan Rachel Wood and Marilyn Manson, aka Brian Werner. So we may never be privy to what really happened, but again, the courts will decide what will happen with Illma Gore and Evan Rachel Wood in this lawsuit against them. Another element working in Wood's favor is that she doesn't appear to have any of the criminal history that Illma Gore allegedly has. So no fraud, nothing like that. Although there is another red flag in terms of some of her domestic status currently that we'll get into soon. And then the final but somewhat dubious factor in her favor is the support from other alleged victims of Marilyn Manson. Although, because some of them have recanted some of their claims and other former romantic partners of Manson have denied any such behavior, it does make this supportive factor a little bit more precarious. Now, getting into the red flags. One red flag for Evan Rachel Wood is her relationship with Illma Gore. It just kind of calls into question her judge of character, being in a relationship with a woman with possible psychopathic traits. So we'll kind of leave it at that. Another red flag in terms of Evan Rachel Wood and really questioning whether or not her motives are sinister is this situation with the custody of her son, which again, A lot of this is alleged. It's from the media. We don't, at least to my knowledge, have access to these legal court documents. But it is with the situation with the shared custody of her son and relinquishing the custody allegedly or placement possibly, it does call into question what's going on in her mindset right now. And is she in her right mind? I don't know. Again, it is, a lot of this is alleged, but it does call into question her state of mind and her motives. And then finally, it is alleged that possibly she was having financial issues or maybe career trouble. Again, this is alleged. I don't know if any of this is true, and we don't have access to her finances. We don't know that her career was stagnating horribly. I mean, besides seeing her in 13 in 2003, I don't recall what else she has starred in, but I do recall really enjoying that movie in particular. So now I'll give a few of my thoughts on Evan Rachel Wood's personality. And going back to the 2003 film 13, I just want to look a little bit at the plot of that movie and this enmeshed codependent relationship in which Evan Rachel Wood's character, Tracy Freeland, really absorbs the personality and even the style of Nikki Reed or Evie in the movie. And then we see this kind of play out, as is noticed by other content creators, in Evan Rachel Wood's relationships. So again, this is all speculation, but it does draw into question what's going on in these dynamics, whether they're within the character she plays or relationships. And again, it's all speculation, but possibly it's something to consider. At the very least, we do see that Evan Rachel Wood does seem to have a penchant for shock artists as romantic partners. So let's just take a moment to appreciate this gold toilet covered in Louis Vuitton leather. I wonder, is somebody really going to poop on that? So if we take a look at Evan Rachel Wood's mental health, we could look at the DSM, but again, I don't want to armchair speculate on her diagnosis. What I will say is that Evan Rachel Wood has allegedly reported that she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in 2019. She said at the time, "My mind at the time was filled with scars and shadows, and most importantly, so much shame. I was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I didn't know it." And she goes on to say that this trauma was caused by multiple coercive sexual and domestic violence encounters in a previous romantic relationship. And then, of course, flash forward 2021, she names Marilyn Manson, aka Brian Warner, as her perpetrator. And again, it would be very easy to armchair speculate on what personality disorders might be happening here. However, I don't want to armchair speculate. I don't want to do the whole Amber Heard, Johnny Depp personality disorder thing. That is left to, the expert witnesses and those who interview and provide psychological evaluations to those individuals. But we can, look at personality features and traits and how they might be interacting in terms of relationships between particular individuals. So taking a look at personality features, we can use the 5-factor model, which is broken down in the acronym OCEAN. And 5-factor model, you can find that easily online. I believe it was originally created by Costa and McCrae. But the 5-factor model can be broken down into openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And simply put, openness to experience is what you would expect for a shock rocker. Openness to experience is just a willingness to try on every hat and varieties of spice of life kind of mentality. These individuals are also more likely to engage in different type of fringe practices, whether that's religious, sexual, drug use, etc. Although pathological drug use is more associated with neuroticism, which we'll get to. Conscientiousness is a measure of being rule-bound, schedule-bound, dutiful, industrious, go to work every day, kind of measured loosely by traits like that. Again, there's different subcategories to each of these 5 factors that would be a whole other video to get into. Extroversion is a measure of how much positive emotion somebody experiences, especially in relation to other people. So the more extroverted you are, the more likely you are to seek interaction with other people. Whereas introverts tend to more keep to themselves, and they draw energy more from kind of their internal perceptions, loosely speaking. So we're all familiar with the pop culture definition of introvert versus extrovert. And again, it's more of a spectrum, but loosely speaking, most of us tend to fall either more introverted or more extroverted. And there are outliers that are either extremely extroverted or extremely introverted as well. Agreeability is a measurement simply of how agreeable somebody is. More agreeable people tend to value altruism, getting along with other people, everybody agreeing with one another, and people who have lower agreeability tend to be more antagonistic, going against the grain, more likely to engage in arguments for the sake of argument's sake, or even push the envelope a bit in terms of starting conflict, starting arguments, things like that. So that's something when we see kind of some of the shock element of different art forms, there might be an element of disagreeability there, an element of rule breaking that might be a symptom of lower conscientiousness, but also might be a symptom of low agreeability, that kind of F the system attitude. And then we have neuroticism, which is a measure of how much negative emotion somebody experiences. And this might be the case, especially when we are talking about artists who explore darker themes. They might be exploring those themes as a result of experiencing their own neuroses. In terms of Evan Rachel Wood, we see that she's highly open to experience, evidenced by her role in Louis XIII and her relationship with Marilyn Manson and the like. It seems like she opts to identify with a variety of different personalities and styles, and again, this is probably a symptom of high openness to experience. In addition, she seems to be highly extroverted and seems to really thrive on her interactions with other individuals, sometimes to a point of codependency, it seems. It also seems that she's highly agreeable, which is also probably an element of that unhealthy codependency that may possibly be a factor in her relationships, although again, that's all alleged at this point. In terms of conscientiousness, it's a little less clear. I would need more evidence on, how she lives her life, and does she feel rule-bound and dutiful and industrious, or is she more of a live and let live, fly by the seat of my pants type of person? And then in terms of neuroticism, it seems at first glance that she's rather low in neuroticism and negative emotions, but then when she talks about PTSD and these, really claims of horrendous abuse and experiencing a lot of a negative emotion, it does draw into question if maybe she is somebody that does experience quite a bit of negative emotion, especially in relationship to traumatic events, real or perceived, to her. And again, it does this possible neuroticism play into her perception of her relationship, or even how she interacted with Manson during their relationship. Moving on to Marilyn Manson, we can see that likewise he's also very high in openness to experience for the same aforementioned reasons, being a shock rocker. In terms of conscientiousness, I would be led to believe he's probably somewhat higher in conscientiousness in terms of his desire to continue working on different projects and albums, and having a theme in mind and following through with a plan. And it just seems like he's probably that type of person. But again, I don't know. I mean, I've never met the man, and every celebrity has a whole crew, entourage of people around them that can do a lot of things for them. So does that enable them to be a little bit more loosey-goosey and less structured? And, oh, somebody else will do my laundry for me, I don't need to wake up on time? I don't know. So in terms of conscientiousness, it's a little harder to judge something like that off the bat. In terms of agreeability, I would argue that Marilyn Manson is someone who's quite low in agreeability. Just again, in terms of his chosen profession, his chosen art form, his message, his persona as the Antichrist superstar, I would say that's all indication of being pretty disagreeable. And that doesn't mean that he's not unkind or not compassionate. It just means he tends to disagree quite a bit with the status quo and other people's point of view, and might start arguments about it sometimes. And could probably be a bit of an ass. And disagreeable people are not always peachy roses and sunshine to be in a relationship with, because they will argue with you and they will debate you, even if sometimes you don't want them to do, because you want to keep the peace. You're more agreeable, and now they're frickin' picking at your very last nerve, right? They're tap dancing on the last nerve you have. But again, that's all speculation of what possibly might be going on in their relationship. And then in terms of neuroticism, this is also something that is all speculative. But when you're talking about, things like dark themes and exploring dark emotions, and it's no doubt that Manson struggled, quite a bit emotionally through his content and his breakups and his drug use and all of that, I would be led to believe that he probably experiences some degree of more than mid-range neuroticism that he tries to manage through his work and through his drug use and relationships and what have you. And again, neuroticism is not a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. It is something that's genetically based. Some of us are wired to be more neurotic than others, and we can get into that at a later date. But suffice it to say, it is something real that many people experience more psychological pain as a result of how they perceive the world through their senses, dictated by their particular brain flavor and nervous system. So we can get really lofty, but let's stay on track because we are almost to the end of this video. Suffice it to say that if Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood were both exhibiting symptoms or features of higher neuroticism at the time of their relationship, combined with that with substance use and abuse, yeah, I can see where a lot of psychological abuse would absolutely take place, and possibly physical and domestic violence as well. Although, again, those allegations are dubious, I can very much see where their relationship could become toxic as a result of substance use, the age gap, generational gap perhaps, and neuroticism and difference of opinion. And so that's where, again, situations like getting in an hours-long argument about a bottle of water versus a glass of water could absolutely happen between two individuals who are experiencing neuroticism. They're not perceiving reality through a rose-colored glasses, it's through distorted, warped lens. All of that does lead to what we perceive as psychological manipulation, gaslighting, all of the like. So again, I'm not blaming the drugs, I'm not blaming the people. It is a toxic dynamic that happens in so many relationships where psychological abuse does take place, but it's not always as simple as he done it, she done it. Sometimes it is mutually abusive, and in many cases it is, especially on the psychological level solely. So those are all my thoughts on why I believe Marilyn Manson is most likely innocent of the charges of sexual abuse and physical assault, in terms of the psychological abuse, that's less clear and less murky about what went on between him and Evan Rachel Wood during their relationship, and all of that is speculative, so we really can't determine if it's true or not. And I've also shared my opinion on why I believe Illma Gore is a psychopath and likely will go to prison because it's probably likely that she did commit this fraud. And in addition, I'm not sure what's going to happen with Evan Rachel Wood. She is a co-conspirator, so I'm assuming since she's named here as a defendant, perhaps she is culpable in some way. But again, I'm not an attorney. All I know is that I do hope Illma Gore goes to prison. I do hope that we learn more about the dynamics that take place in some of these relationships, even though I still think that we owe it to the humans involved here to respect their privacy. I think all of us would probably benefit from understanding more about what happens in dynamics where people are abusing a lot of drugs and experimenting with a lot of different lifestyle spirited activities, if you will, right? So we'll leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll give me some feedback. Thank you very much.